Welcome to Designing Cities for All,
the 2-year activity program of Pakhuis de Zwijger,
in which we take a deep dive into designing products,
places and systems for all.
At every level, we can see certain communities being marginalized, being taken advantage of, and it's all part of the design.
When you're neurodiverse, you're in a world that isn't designed for you.
We're not the only species on the planet. Mm-hmm. The city needs to be also a city for the other species.
And we need to do something because the old structures in which we worked don't work.
Things won't change just if we just let things happen.
Instead of saying, what can we do to mitigate the impacts? We need to start asking ourselves, what is causing that?
Design is political, that we need to design processes, that we are all different, but there are things that unite us.
These are the things that need to be on the table, that need to be recovered in order to redesign the society.
Everything around us was once designed and can therefore be redesigned.
How do we teach design in a way where students can be really critical of the systems of power that have informed and dominated design?
Inclusion happens by design or not at all.
I think it's always some kind of a co-creation process, and you have to make very little steps and then figure out together what works and what doesn't.
It takes as much time to do something good as it takes time to do something bad.
All design tells a story.
But there's also a bit of a need to not just write ourselves into the past, but also kind of write ourselves into the future.
I invite you so much to join my path of liberation, and I'm hopefully being welcomed by your path of liberation.
We have to heal collectively. We have to help each other understand some of these constructs that actually divide us.
Not fitting in was a blessing, or I would have turned out just like you.
Hello and welcome to you all from Pakhuis de Zwijger. My name is Faiza Mohammadi and I'm a member of Designing Cities for All team and also a program maker here at Pakhuis. But tonight I'm also doing the moderation of this program, and Designing Cities for All is a 2-year-long research and activity program in which we take a deep dive into designing places, products and systems for all. You just watched the trailer of the first 2 year, and we started this in 2020 and ended in December, and we started the new version which is for 2023 and 2024 with the topic of regeneration and regenerative design, and we will do that with 6 fellows in total. But we already had the first 2 fellows, and you can watch back the programs on Pakhuis de Zwijger's website. All the programs have been recorded. And tonight, the program is a kind of a special for Designing Cities for All. So it's not part of a series and not part of the fellowship, but it's a one-time episode program, and we will focus on, of course, streets. And you're joining us online. We have also audiences here in the studio, but not a lot because the weather here in Amsterdam is so good that not a lot of people wanted to join here. Probably they're going to watch back. Of course, tonight we're going to focus on the functions of a street, not only as a place for cars to move, but also like political and social functions of the street and how we can facilitate them. And we are going to try to understand how this facilitation can work. And of course, we have speakers here with us on the table with me, and gladly enough, all of them are physically present here and no Zoom speakers. So I'm going to introduce them. So a warm welcome and a round of applause for Meredith Glazer here. Thank you for joining us. And also Kenneth Adu, Dre Orhan, and also, I need to check this, Femke Cowling Fricks. I did my practice for the pronunciation. So yeah, we want to include you people here. Also, you're not allowed, but if you want to ask questions, please feel free to do so. There will be Q&A part, and you can wait for my sign. Then one of my colleagues will come to you with a mic so you can put your questions. And for the people watching us online, you also have the chance to ask your questions. So you can go to menti.com and insert the code 11575191. I will repeat it one more time, 11575191. And then I will receive your question. If you want to pose it to one of the speakers, you can do. If not, then they're free to answer that. And so yeah, I guess with all this being said, we can start the tonight's program. Streets are political spaces, and of course the term political was something made out of us, which is like the combination of public and political. So we just want to understand about the political and social. We could not put social, so that was something that we added. Okay, let's start with Femke. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're so glad. I know that you got a very busy agenda, but thank you for being here. Nice. You introduce yourself as political philosopher and anthropologist, and currently you are also working as the VBOT chair at UFA, and also lecturing about youth and society in Holland University of Applied Science. Can you let us more know about your current roles and also the focus of your research?
Yeah, so the coming years I will be looking into urban issues that are important today in Amsterdam, focusing on the relationship between different communities in the city and between residents and the municipality. And there is this worry about the growing distance and distrust between the government and citizens, but also between different communities in the city. So I'm going to look into that and see what we can do to bridge the gap basically between different worlds that make up the city. I'm in a way hopeful also. I see a lot of practices of solidarity taking place in the city, and I think often those practices take place in areas that are overlooked by the government. So I want to see what we can learn from what's taking place in the shadow zones of the city basically. So that also relates to the topic that we're going to talk about today. I think the streets as a place where a certain kind of reinvention of society is taking place, innovation is often taking place, and a space where new forms of knowledge can arise that can teach institutional partners also about innovation.
Yeah. And the focus of your, the fact that you're a lecturer as youth and society, does it mean that your target population of your research is only the youth, or it's
it used to be, but now that I'm doing this professorship by special appointment, I will look broader at different communities in the city. But I've been studying youth and what they're doing in the city and how they're creating space for themselves and claiming space, the voice they have and how it can be heard better has been a topic for me for many years. And I think young generations by default almost, because it's a part of this life phase, are experimenting with different forms to associate with each other. They're searching for their identity and their place in society. And they have this certain openness to go outside of the sort of, how to say it in English, the beaten track, off the beaten track in a certain way, creating, I love this word in English, desire paths, like their own routes to get to certain goals that they have in mind, to reach certain ideals. And they often do that in unexpected ways that adults not always understand. But I think there is a lot of innovation and inspiration there that we can learn from also.
Nice. But also, I guess one of the main reasons that you are joining us tonight at this table is that because of the book that you have authored, Streets Politics, which in Dutch is Straatpolitiek. And can you tell us more about the book? What is it about, and what did you focus on?
I wanted to sort of paint a different picture in response to this sort of idea of young people as being apolitical. So also in the recent elections, when you look at the voter outcome rates amongst young people, so roughly between 16 and 27 years old, it seems that young people are not very political because they don't come out to vote. And also in my research, I meet a lot of young people that say, oh, politics is not for me. It's not my thing. The world of the politicians, it's so far away from my experiences. I don't feel represented. I don't even understand the language that they're speaking in parliament. I don't feel connected to the municipality, so it's not my world. But at the same time, when we continue the conversation, they are very aware of all kinds of societal issues, and they have strong opinions, strong principles also, and strong ideas about how to shape society and how to make it just, equal, sustainable, all these kinds of things. So I wanted to actually describe the expressions of politics that young people feel more comfortable with. It might be non-institutional or maybe even anti-institutional, but nevertheless very political in a strong sense. So it's more about politics outside of politics. And I think a lot of political agency that young people express is taking place in public space, on the streets, for example.
Yeah.
So I give some examples from that in the book also.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned focusing on politics out of the politics, how would you define politics of a street?
Yeah, so I actually borrowed the term from Asef Bayat, who is an anthropologist, sociologist from Iran. And he wrote about all kinds of communities studying developments in Iran that are actually overlooked by the government. And they are fending for themselves, basically, also in practices of solidarity, practices of mutual aid, collectively creating alternatives for the kinds of public services that are neglected by the state. And so he's talking about street vendors, for example, or squatters who together form communities and take care of each other in informal ways. And he is saying that this kind of collective alternative actions and public services are actually slowly changing the relationship between politics and people. And they're actually quietly creating a sort of revolution bottom up on the streets in the different neighborhoods of the city. They're not the heroes with a big political agenda at the forefront of social movements, but in their everyday lives, they're actually creating this sort of more just society that people are talking about. So it's everyday life politics. It's about basic necessities also, about housing, about electricity, about healthcare in a very accessible, equal way. And for him, that is where new political movements can originate even before they have a strong agenda and a strong leadership. And I think this kind of politics, we see it in many different places, also here in the West, in the Netherlands. And it's often young people that are doing this kind of everyday politics much more than the organized, formal kind of politics.
Yeah, I understand. So somehow you're suggesting that they are doing a political action, but not necessarily in a political party, something like voting, an act of voting, something like that. Interesting. Thank you. Of course, we will come back to you. I want to continue with Dre. Dre, you are like the street artist, I would say, and also co-founder of Favela Painting and also a member of United Painting Foundation. Can you tell us the story behind these two organizations, how they started, what kind of activities do you do, and just let us know more about it?
Yeah, so I got into the work with favela painting in 2005 with my former colleague Jeroen Koolhaas, and it was just a one-off idea. We found ourselves in a neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro, and we were super inspired by the way that this particular community was organized, the way that in favelas things were organized, and there was a completely different set of rules than how we knew it from here. And somehow it inspired us greatly to think maybe we can combine something with creativity, and somehow organize a visual intervention. That was the thing that we had in the back of our head. It was very experimental back then, and it just grew into like a whole like movement and organization and foundation. So it was a very unplanned thing. And I think that many of the things that Femke talked about, like where she approaches it from like an academic perspective, and it's all like we find the same things very interesting. Or I find all these issues very interesting, also from the perspective of like from within a community itself. And I think that, like Femke said, is very much overlooked, all the power that of creativity and ideas that come from communities and from street culture and from people that maybe organize themselves and their ideas more in these like shadow zones or informal settings. So that inspires me greatly. And it gave me and our organization also a place to work in, because within these different sets of rules, there's also more room and more flexibility. And that's where we found ourselves to become like visual activists, I would say.
Okay, cool. And then like the other organization, the United Painting, somehow came out of favela.
Yeah, I
painting,
mean,
because
we just started, we called it favela painting because we were painting in a favela, and then later we thought it was a really like a wrong name and very stigmatizing, so we tried to get rid of it. And then we were also working with a lot of people with a refugee background, and then people said like, yeah, we'll call it refugee painting. We thought it's even worse. So then we figured we need a strong name that kind of represents everything, and then we thought about it very long, and then we just said it's called United Painting, which is kind of strong and weak at the same time, because it doesn't really say anything, but it unites us all in one. So that's how we call our organization.
Interesting. I know that you've done a lot of projects in all around the world, like United States, Netherlands, Europe, and also like Brazil, of course. But can you just let us know about like 2 examples that stood out for you, or like 2 projects that you can always remember, or just...
Well, I think that every project is for me stands out. I just love the process. So once it's finished, I'm always really sad. I think that our projects are much more about the actual process of making them. And but I think the project that we started in Rio obviously has like a very personal feeling, because we lived there for a very long time and we made so many friends, and we're still trying to be active there, but it's also financially difficult to support projects. But we're always struggling to see if we can continue our work in Brazil as well. Like I think that would be for me like my personal.
Interesting. I guess you also worked on a project which was like a carpet that was made, the one that you shared the video with us. Do you want to also tell about that, so we can also share the video?
So at the moment, what we've noticed is that we worked in public space on buildings, and the problem is that if you paint something, you have a responsibility, you change a neighborhood, but you also have the responsibility over deterioration, somehow out of like we wanted to paint somewhere where we were not allowed to paint the actual ground. We were asked to paint in the Amsterdam Museum, and so just to as a means to paint something, we started to paint on mats. This is actually that project. So we started painting on rubber mats. And then we loved painting on rubber mats so much that now we only do that. So we only paint very temporary, because, like I said, it's only about the process. So it's actually easier. You make a huge painting and then you just wrap it up and it's gone. And the whole, like the emphasis is much more on the fact that you are creating it, and not at all on what you are creating. And so that's why I really like these places where you can go into like a monumental space, or you could go here and just completely change the place temporarily and have massive change and all work together and have this feeling of collaboration and togetherness, and it's just like instant. It works really well.
Let's just watch the video of this project that has the different stages.
Oh yeah, this was actually our first mat, because we wanted to make a project for people that don't necessarily feel welcomed or that are welcomed in society. A lot of the people that worked with us felt that. So we.
What do you mean not welcome? You mean refugees,
well,
or
like people that, for instance, have like are undocumented, are waiting in our horrible system of endless nothingness,
yeah.
you know, in all these like camps that are all over Holland, unfortunately. So we said like we want to create a space where we welcome ourselves and each other.
Mhm.
So we said like, well, it's kind of corny, but corniness always works. We said like we'll make like a big welcome mat for ourselves, and then when we make it and we stand on it, and then we feel welcome on that particular place. So it's kind of like super instant place making. And the fun thing about this was we made this inside at NDSM Hall, and because it's on mats, you can roll it up. So we just rolled it up, and we moved the whole thing to the Dam Square. And without any, like, we never asked anybody for any permission, but you know, we just rolled it out, and everybody's like, "What are you doing?" We're like, "Well, we're putting our welcome mat for ourselves." And I really liked it. It was like super weird, like performative action.
Nice.
So
And
I really like this project, actually.
yeah, and then like in the case of this project, like the people that you were talking about, you did the painting with, of course, were the people like undocumented people or the people who were not welcome. But like in the whole process of this act of painting, how do you include other people out of your foundation, out of your team? Is it like any passerby can just join you and start painting, or is it a specific target population that you
No, we
work with
don't.
them?
Well, I mean, we work mostly, like we work a lot in AZC's or in like crisiscentra, like this kind of, why would you?
You're asking your wrong person.
Yeah, and then and a lot of people that are like show that they like these types of projects, we stay in touch with them. So then then we just invite them for other projects. And sometimes it's people that pass by and say, "Oh, I want to join," and then they join. We don't really have a target group.
Okay.
If you have time, you're welcome.
Interesting. Yes, I would love to. Thank you so much. We will come back to you, of course. And I would like to go to Meredith. Meredith Glazer, thank you so much for being here tonight with us. You are urban mobility researcher and currently the executive director of Urban Cycling Institute. And of course, we've talked before, and you told me that you started your journey in your education as a public health student. I'm really curious to know, how did this go for you? Like how now you're doing like as executive director at Urban Cycling Institute, and what kind of activities does this include?
From the public health perspective, you mean, or how that
No,
that journey
not from
happened?
that. How that journey happened, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, entering public health, I was wanting to help communities become healthier. And so I had that sort of ideological notion in my head. But then my first course I took, the professors were very strongly associating public health determinants with the built environment. So the environment around us actually determines our health and our health outcomes. And that sort of blew my mind. So I thought, if I want to help create healthier communities, whether that's through food access or physical activity or social cohesion, mental health, then actually influencing the built environment will probably be something that is more of an upstream, preventative activity. And so that's how I saw urban planning. But then in urban planning, I took a course on bicycle pedestrian transportation planning and thought once again, wow, what a great marriage between these fields of public health and urban planning, which on the UC Berkeley campus are on the opposite sides of the campus, which I thought was so symbolic of how far they've grown apart. But then for me, I moved to the Netherlands 12 years ago, and the first thing that I saw out of my window, I don't know if the slide can come up, of the view of the square I was lived above. This was my view one morning in August, and I was really surprised by all the activity that was happening here. And that is when I realized I lived above a school. And I thought, wow, this is such an interesting combination of all these different elements coming together: people, streets, schools, places where people are going and living. And to me, the bicycle represents what's called a boundary object from which we can explore all these types of really interesting interactions and urban issues in our cities. And that's what the Urban Cycling Institute does. It was founded at the University of Amsterdam in 2016. And we got together a whole bunch of researchers who were they didn't call themselves cyclists, right?
No.
And they weren't studying cycling. They were studying gentrification. They were studying other types of issues, but through the lens or through the case of the bicycle. And that's what we do. We do research and training and workshops for the current and next generation of urban professionals.
Nice. And how do you, like, with this introduction being said, how do you see the relation between the cycling in the streets and the political function of them?
The streets
Yes.
themselves. Yeah. I mean, streets are a form of space, and space is an asset. And streets in most cities consume probably the most, or one of the most largest assets that any city has. And so this is, of course, a resource. And this is a fantastic graphic produced by, the attribution is missing. It should be on the bottom, but this is by Michael Koval Anderson at Copenhagenize. And what he called the arrogance of space was that for the most part in the last 100 years, the movement and storage of personal private vehicles has consumed our urban streets for the purpose of moving, right? How we move from A to B. And so this, you could see in the graphic, the red is a very dominating force on our street. But this doesn't always have to be this way, right? This is something that was introduced only 100 years ago. It's a blip in history.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are cities around the world that are increasingly questioning this, right? Is this something that is still relevant for cities today? With public health issues in populations and fatalities increasing. It's the number one cause of death for young people is traffic crashes. Obesity is rising. Mental health issues are increasing. And how our mobility is influencing all these different characteristics. So
Yeah. So basically you're suggesting that we need a kind of paradigm shift from where the function of a street as serving for movement should be used in other ways, right?
Yeah, the use of streets as a form of public space, I think, is very much, or it's increasingly questioned, right? What should our streets be for? And because they are such an asset to a city, the distribution of this asset, right, is a political act. So taking away space from vehicles towards a different even mode or a different use is political, because there are all these other things going on, right? I mean, we need to move goods through a city. So how can we still move goods through a city if we are removing space for trucks and vans and things like that? But a paradigm, right, is something that is a system inside of systems inside of systems. So unpacking one small variable will inevitably result in unpacking more variables. And I was just in Paris a couple weekends ago, mm-hmm. and was completely blown away by the amount of change that has happened in a very, very short time period. That, the changes that have been made are simply, and I simply should be in quotes, right? Simply a reallocation of space from cars towards other uses: walking, biking, rollerblading, children playing, of course, there's tourism and just moving, right, from A to B, but sitting, we see in the video, relaxing, leisure, And this was a view and a use of a street that until very recently was not happening. So it's a case of bold action by several different partners, a mayor, but also local action groups, advocacy groups, and the results are astounding.
Yeah,
I could actually have a conversation on the street in Paris and hear what my partner was saying. A couple years ago, that couldn't happen.
Yeah, true. So somehow they reclaimed back the street from the cars, and they could also change the function of the street in a way toward more social activation rather than just a movement.
But you also see, if you talk to any French person, they will say, "Oh, yes, it's so political. It's very contentious what is happening."
Yeah.
So this is a political. Yeah, it's a political act because that is the result of a paradigm starting to shift. You know you will face resistance.
Of course, yeah. Interesting. And I think the topic that you were talking about, like streets being as an asset, I guess that's a conversation that we should go more in depth after I talk to Kenneth. But that's also the question that always remained there, like who owns the street? I mean, the bigger question is who owns the city, but when we just breaks it down, it goes to who owns the public space and who owns the street. But thank you so much for bringing this up. And let's go to our last, but of course not least, the speaker, Kenneth Adu. Thank you so much for being here tonight with us. You're an artist and painter, and you have been contributed in 2021 to this cool project, which was called A Funeral for a Street Culture. Can you start by letting us know what does a street culture mean, and what was this project about, and what kind of work you prepared for that exhibition?
The exhibition was based on the death of street culture, actually, like how everything that's from the streets is like being incorporated into like mass production. Like when we think of like music for hip hop, for instance, like how it was for the streets, but then it becomes so mainstream that like big organizations just know like we need to include like hip hop so that we can sell a project or make it known to the masses. And I really thought like when they said like a funeral for street culture, I felt like, ooh, like what is it? What is the culture then going to be if it's dying? Because there was already a saying like by Nazir Jones, like he said like hip hop is dead, like. And I also felt like then when the curators invited me to be a part of this exhibition, like A Funeral for Street Culture, so everything that we come up with is not going to last forever. It's not going to be part in our core, because it will eventually be taken out. But what if we don't create anything anymore, but then do we then ourselves?
Does this sentence also mean like the thing that you're saying, it will be eventually taken out? Does this also similar to the sentence that you once told me that streets are the extension of the home?
I think so. Yeah, I feel like a street is the extension. Is there where you find friends? Is there where you find people who you can relate to? Is there where you find like maybe you have a passion at home, but is there the streets that you maybe like develop it much further? And I think the streets are like have more. There's more meaning to it, because it's people see like when we talk about the streets, like people may see like it's just a pavement, but for other people it's like that's the place where we meet. That's the place where we get educated. So
a live place where you interact like with real people, and
True.
This social interaction happen. But also it was mentioned in the exhibition and on the website, it was mentioned that the purpose of this project was that people can rethink and reevaluate their relationship with the notion of the street, how it was reflected in your work, and how did you put this into account?
Wait, can you rephrase the question one more time?
Sure. It was mentioned during the exhibition, like this funeral for street culture, that the purpose was that people can rethink and reevaluate their relationship with the street. I'm asking how it was just reflected in your work, or how did you take this into account, or how do you just reflect on this?
Actually, the way I reflected on my work was more like I made a triptych that discussed like the death of like two young black men, and I think the way I saw it, like if like black children can be safe in the streets, like they are like I think like all children are like creators in general, but there's some like I know like young black children, like they don't get credit for everything that they do, but if they get killed, like then the streets are already dead. Like that was my input with my work. So I think I took it more direct, because I saw like a lot of the other artists like put like different kind of, they played around with it with the team. So and I think for the audience it was more like when you say like that they could reflect on the streets, I think like what kind of connection do they have to the streets themselves, and by seeing our works, like what does it tell them of the culture?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So somehow also you're suggesting that you were trying to make it clear that streets are not safe for certain groups, or it's not it's not just like how it is performing.
I think the streets is it's kind of hard though. Like,
yeah, of course, I know. Like just putting it in
Yeah,
words,
no.
it's of course sometimes hard to just like when you're talking about something that is not that tangible, like a street for people is always like okay, like some pavements and then car moving around. But of course, like our discussion is to understand like it's something livable, something living, and also that different functions can come out of it, not just like these movements. So that's what I guess
the last
your
one is
work-
like, because if different functions come out of it, like do people also like feel like they're afraid of it? Like
they don't feel safe.
they don't feel safe.
Yeah.
But I don't think like you shouldn't feel safe, because the streets have a function for everybody. But maybe like how the government have designed the streets is like, it's just like a pedestrian way, like you just walk through it. It's not supposed to be like a living space, or a place for education. So I was just talking with my friend, I forgot your
Meredith.
with Meredith about how in certain places in Amsterdam, like you can just sit in the street and then just hang, or how she went to Paris and then she saw like these activities taking place as well. But then in certain parts of Amsterdam, it's not there at all. Like you can just hang. But if it's possible if you can do that, but this doesn't make you offended, but other things do make you offended, then what are the rules that you can have on the streets then? Like, is it just like, okay, this is allowed besides walking, but you can't play music, or so?
Yeah, exactly. It's also related to what Dre was talking about, like why not painting is allowed, but like all of these advertisements all around, like why it is allowed, but like walking it's also allowed, or just painting. thank you so much. At this point, I guess we have introduced all of you four, and then, of course, we will come back to our conversation. But before that, I want to open the floor for questions in the room. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. My colleague will come to you. And if you don't have any questions at this point, at the end of the program, we will also have another 10 minutes. So I don't think a lot of questions will arise from this small population here. But I would like also, we have an artist here with us tonight, Sandy Bossemans. Please, a warm applause for her. She will give us a piece. She is a spoken word artist, and after her performance, we will continue our conversation.
I once asked my mother very, very nonchalantly if she herself knew how she came to be in this specific country, these specific streets. And no, I'm not discussing the cliche, because it's true how for years she saved up her money only to be told upon arrival that her visa application wasn't sufficient. On the second try, she was allowed to come home with my father. He had heard about this far, far away country, and I still wonder to this day why he was overwhelmed by her beauty, that of my mother and her country, and still decided it would be better to bring her to his father's cold little village streets. I know when I ask my mother why she is still here after all these years, she answers she's here because of her daughters, the now existing and possible future grandchildren. My mother will never spark up the conversation talking about our shared colonial past, while our shared past may be the only reason for my existence. I can hear her talking in my ear, telling me I should not think about it and be grateful that God had chosen to make me. I whisper, but Mom, even the religion you chose to practice every single day as a true devotee was, according to some, once delivered to you via a boat. I once asked my mother very, very nonchalantly if she herself knew how she came to be in this specific country on these specific streets.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandy. We will have another performance by her at the end of the program. But I want to mention the Menti code again. If you people watching us online, you have questions, you can put your question in menti.com and insert the code 11575191, and then I will receive it here. So let's go back to our conversation, and I would like to start with the topic that Meredith, you brought about the ownership of the streets. It's a question to you all. Who do you think owns the street? Like, because we assume to think that streets are asset of local government, like municipalities, and maybe it is. We're not sure, right? But what do you think about it? How do you reflect on that through your work, through your research, or anyone wants to start?
I can start.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I mean, if we think about the rules and regulations in place, then yes, local government, regional government owns the street. And I think that for many cases here in the Netherlands, where the local municipality does own a lot of the street, something like 98% or something, that actually makes it a very, very unusual case. As where I'm from in the US, that's not the case. So in that sense, it's much more difficult to make any type of physical changes to the street or to make demands on developers or businesses or things, other stakeholders involved. So in that sense, if we're talking about Amsterdam, they have quite a lot of power over the activities that then go, take place on the street. And then that influences, how they can possibly change or not.
So you're suggesting that like them being in charge of the streets, like somehow owning the street, it's making it easier for us to regulate and make changes that we want? Something like that?
It can be, but not necessarily, the case all the time that it's easy to make changes, right?
True.
This is also the Netherlands, where
it's
very bureaucratic.
I guess Dre might not agree.
With what exactly?
With the fact that municipalities be mostly in charge, because you also do a lot of projects that maybe like municipalities ask you to do. What kind of relations do you also have when they are asking you to make a project like a street painting project? What kind of approach do you have?
With municipalities?
Yes.
I think that I try to avoid working with municipalities at all costs.
Yeah.
Just because of bad experiences. In theory, we own the streets because they're in our cities, and the municipality is there, works for us to facilitate whatever we want out of them. And in reality, that never happens anywhere in any form. It doesn't really work. So I'm not sure what would work, but I'm all for taking control, either through organizations or through personal whatever. Like, I don't know. It's a difficult. It's a very difficult topic. We could talk about it all night.
Yeah, it's true. How do you reflect on that, Femke?
Yeah, so I think different streets are owned by different people in different communities, and the government or municipalities tend to have this very normative idea of how public space should be used, how the street should be used. So your example from Paris, everybody will agree that that's lovely because it's all white middle class people doing very nice things on the streets, not making noise, not selling things, behaving in nice white middle class ways. So if it's groups of young people of color spending time on the streets, doing different stuff, more related to street culture, to hip hop culture, for example, it's much more seen as a risk to livability in the city, right? It should be disciplined, surveilled, etc. So yeah, those communities of young people of color, they can maybe own the streets in their own neighborhood, but not in the city center, because they will be policed. So it really depends on this normative idea of the idealized citizen that can spend time on the streets or not. That's very, it's dividing also who can own the streets and who cannot own the streets. And I think you are very right in saying that, as long as we use the streets as a thorough way to go from A to B and we don't spend too much time in it, it's easy. But when people are using the streets as their home and spending more time in it and creating their communities, we can only accept it, or the government can only accept it if those people fit in a certain idea of non-risky populations. And when they don't fit that idea, then there is a whole different technique of repression put onto those communities. So yeah, I'd say that's an inequality that we all have to deal with, I think, and that people are struggling against also. So I really liked the painting of the mats. They looked a bit like rugs that people have in their living room. Mm-hmm. So just to put those rugs on a public square in the middle of the city center and saying, hey, this is our home, we are welcome here. I think that's a way of claiming ownership of those spaces that are usually over-regulated by the municipality, and a way of, also politicizing the streets for those communities that are usually overlooked or repressed in public space. So, I think there's a battle also going on over who can own the streets and who cannot, and what we can do about that.
It was very interesting. A policeman came up to us and he was like, "What are you doing?" And we said, we were like, "What do you mean? What are we doing?" And then we had a really interesting conversation, and he was like, "Okay, well, next time just call me, here's my card and whatever, we'll work it out." But I said, "We're not breaking anything, we're not doing, we're just taking a picture. Do you want to be in the picture?" It's like, no, okay, I just didn't get it. So I kind of liked that, like we put it there to question that whole thing. And he also left because it was our space for that little moment of time. So it was very much like a
Yeah, and
political
I think it's also
statement
the
or-
streets are always also a space in between, right? A space in between buildings, neighborhoods and B. So you mentioned the bike as a boundary object. I really like that, because when you use the space in between to spend time and to make it your home and to create different encounters and different practices, something new can emerge also that can sort of also show the city how we can relate to each other in different ways and maybe more inclusive ways. So I like this idea of the space in between and how we can use it to sort of reshuffle those power dynamics between the in and excluded communities and claim space also and do something different with it. So the boundary objects can be the bike or the mats or maybe just a community of young people creating music together on a street corner. I think there is a sort of new sense of ownership maybe also that can be developed.
True, but I also wanted to add something, and that's like going through that narrative, you also need one step behind, and that's like just letting people whose voice are not heard as like marginalized group, that they can do something in the street and then they can reclaim it back, right? So it's like not all around the world, it's like similar, as you were saying, also not similar to Paris, and then it's not about like just taking back from the cars, but at the same time, while it can be a political action, we are not just talking about no cars, pedestrians. While it is a political action in its sense, how it can be fostered in other contexts as well, right? Like you have roots from Ghana, Kenneth, right? How do you see the difference between these two contexts? But you have been born and grown up in Netherlands. How do you see the difference between the contexts in approaching this strategy, let's say, as an example?
I think the streets in Ghana is like people live. They can make use of the streets without having a governmental interference. Like you can have your house here and you can have your store. Like you don't even have to set up store. You can just set up a table and just sell your products.
There's no permission need.
There's no permission. Like you can just but there's also like certain places that are located to sell products of course, like everywhere, like if there's something wrong, like the street is where you go to express your anger. Like we would do the same thing here. Like we would, but I don't think we would riot as easily like to destroy like the shops, because that is where we like the things that we feel like we oppress us, we would destroy sooner. And because this is what I sometimes find confusing is when there's injustice being taken place, that we need to frustrate it on our neighbor, but my neighbor is also like he's also having as much inconveniences as I have. But everybody be like, but you're still part of the system. Like maybe you have a place in the street where I am not welcomed in from the get-go, you know? So, and then in Ghana, it may be as well, because just because you may be a bit more balanced on the scale of life, because you have ownership. I always think like when I saw like public in the name, PUBLITICAL spaces, I was thinking about Do the Right Thing from the scene from Sal's Pizzeria, because that's like the place where everybody in the movie came together, but it was also the place where everything went wrong, and it was the place that burned down. Like, so because that was their street, their domain, like that was their, like what Femke was just saying, like as long as you feel like you fit in this normative way of how we see ourselves as a citizen. And I don't think that's why then it's like it becomes a gated community and an open community. and but in Ghana you would have a gated community, so it would be defended. Like you can't come here. But in the Netherlands, it's different. Like you would maybe have like police circling around. Like okay, we've seen. Like maybe it's really a white neighborhood. It's not like a diverse neighborhood. Like in East or maybe in South, it could be happen. But even now in South, it's not. It's not like that anymore. Like that, the police will come easily, and then because they see a few colored kids walking through the neighborhood, and they feel like, oh, they are showing criminal behavior or something. But it could happen, you know.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's been a bit more. More people, I feel like, oh, like they can live here, like they could live there, but I don't know, like.
No, I understand, and I also liked the fact that you were saying like how people are more free to act in a street as a public space, because also like the example that Femke you were saying from Asaf Bayat, he also have this theory on street vendors that somehow we do not need to regulate them, so they have this self-regulation thing in their activities kind of thing, rather than just allocating a space to them, that them coming and start selling things. So it was very interesting, thank you. But also you mentioned the next topic that I wanted to move to, and it's about like speaking of anger and riots. What do you think, like it's a question to you all about the street protest and demonstration, how do you relate? Of course it's like when you say politics in the streets, that's the first thing that comes to the people's mind, but I wanted to put it at the end of conversation because of course there are a lot of other things as we covered so far. So do you think like if there is a street protest or demonstration, that's like something, oh, then it's equal, everyone can be there, and then how do you reflect on this? How do you see it as a political activation?
It's good.
Good?
It's good because like I may be a poor person and you may be a rich person, but there's something that has united us. But it can also be like I can see the hypocrisy in your face when you're there, because I feel maybe you can be like, but maybe I can be also be prejudgmental before I really understand what it is that you're standing there, because maybe you could have had that same background without me knowing it, and then you're there because you know, like maybe for instance the case of George Floyd, that the world just came together, and so but it's just like what we came for a cause, and like some people know what the cause was, or like the incident, like it could have happened to the people who like that look like George Floyd, but the people who feel like this, because it's hard to say like everybody's who. It's not like I feel like I shouldn't generalize everybody, because but sometimes you feel like, but you don't know what it is to be in my shoes, you know.
Exactly.
And then you're here, and then you feel like I have a right, but then it's like, now let's talk. Like this is the moment we can come together. Like let's talk, but also like why didn't we actually engage sooner, so that we can.
So there were
always,
no
like,
space for us to somehow make our voice heard. That's how the result is, something like that, and use the street as the space to show that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you want to reflect on that, or this maybe you've been quiet for a while?
I was reminded of last year we put on a conference for researchers who also study cycling, and for a kind of special event, we partnered with an artist who created a zebra machine.
What is that?
Zebra pot machine. Zebra pot machine. It's a cargo bike that is then outfitted with sort of this liquid chalk paint, and then the artist will ride the bike very slowly down the street, and it creates a zebra pot, one long big zebra pot.
Okay.
And I wish I had prepared that video, but it was a sort of surprise for the participants. So we were all hanging out on the Ruterstraat, which is one of these streets in Amsterdam that's constantly coming up as, what are we doing with this street? It's a street right near a university, thousands of students and faculty near it. And the tram line doesn't go on that street anymore. And there's always people crossing so we worked with her, and she made her zebrapad on the Ruterstraat, and my children were there, and immediately it created a whole different space. Immediately, people started, including my kids, started walking, in the street and taking the street over. And I thought it was so fantastic to see this. Of course, the handhaving showed up within 5 minutes, but it's still something that now I cannot unsee, right? Because you see how the space has changed, and then people kind of just take it over. And so I think it was a reminder that, one, how easy it is to just sort of arrange a kind of protest, right? But also to remember that it's, the way that our streets are functioning is not necessarily for the mode or the way of traveling for vehicles.
Yeah.
It can also be for all different types of activities.
True.
And the role of the social movements and the protests as an activation moment is very fascinating. So I really am curious about your work with youth, and also you guys mentioned how you see kind of similar things, even though, from the academic perspective and from the artist perspective. I'd love to hear more about that too.
I think, it's also very complex, because there's a big difference if you want to protest because you want the traffic to change. That's one side. I think it's great, you go out and you protest, maybe you can change something. But if you live in a place where you are not safe to walk on your own street, and there's so many places in the world where kids are not safe and people are not safe in their own street, and they're not safe for their own, because they're targeted by their own government. You can't really afford to protest against that, because people will shoot at you. So it's very complex.
Yeah, and there's also the power of numbers, right? So for people who live in precarious circumstances and who are more at risk to be policed, they can come out in the streets only if there is enough people. If there's thousands of people, they can be protected. We've seen that happen in Iran, in the US also. It's different moments where suddenly somehow this movement emerged, and there were enough people for everyone basically to feel safe to take over the streets for at least a moment. And that's very special, but it's also rare. It doesn't happen that often. So I think it's also important to think in terms of allyship when we think about street protests, because it's not easy for everybody, and it's not possible for everybody to just go out and take over the street. So I've had this discussion a lot around Extinction Rebellion now. So the protests on the highway. I spoke to Jason Bugwandas, who is an activist fighting against closed youth care facilities. He's been in one of those facilities for a large part of his youth. He's very concerned about climate change. He says, I'm all into the cause of Extinction Rebellion, but I cannot go there and be on the highway because I am struggling against the stigma of being a former youth care young person. I cannot afford to be arrested by the police because every wrong step that I take, it will follow me the rest of my life. So I have to be the model citizen, and the model citizen can still not be, blocking the highway. So yeah, I cannot do it. But there's other people who have more privilege who can be there and they can block the highway. So it's important. It's in every street protest, right? There is a front line of people who are in various ways stronger and who can protect the rest that's more behind. So yeah, when we think about social movements emerging on the streets, it's important to think in that way, to have a front line of people who have enough privilege to be the first ones to block the street and take over, and also look for other ways for people with less privilege to be part in the protest, but be protected also, because not everyone can do the same kind of actions on the streets. So I feel sometimes a bit frustrated that when it's about the climate change debate and the actions of Extinction Rebellion, especially people with a lot of exposure and privilege, there's also a lot of famous Dutch people now in the movement who are saying everybody should do it. Why are you at home still not joining us in the protest? And I think that's too easy to say. I mean, it's very reasonable that many people are not there on the streets, but they're waiting at home because it's not an option for them.
Yeah, it's like a hidden exclusion, and I guess that completely resonates to what Kenneth was saying about that you are not wearing the shoes of that person. You don't know about their position, and then it's just about shouting out that you need to be there. I want to thank you to all. I want to again open the floor for the questions. If there are any questions in the room, or if there are any questions online, you can send them to the Menti. I will mention the code again. It's 11575191. And meanwhile, if you're sending that, or if anyone has question, I want to invite Sandy again for the second performance to join us here. Maybe a round of applause for her again.
Mike, yes? They sometimes call me green, and usually they're referring to a lack of experience. I don't even take this as an insult anymore. In fact, I don't think that the color green matches the color of jealousy. No, green to me is being tickled in the middle of grass. Green to me is climbing the tree on the corner next to my mother's house in white pants, which probably were beyond saving after that. In the forbidden path next to the bus lane where we were not actually allowed to go, but have walked so many times that the green there was slowly turned into brown, except for summertime, we felt at home. Between 200,000 leaves. Always chose the slightly too heavy branch, so we had to drag it behind us. We carved our initials because we had seen this in movies, in trees just below the nuts. Me and my sister sailed through a ditch in a rubber boat that was much too small along weeping willows that may have seen too much but gave way to us, parting their leaves. We were the queens of the neighborhood. The green was our energy. And on adventurous days, really adventurous days, we made potpourri from twigs and leaves and rosebuds. Call us green because we couldn't pronounce it in French yet. But with all that green, we made our crowns. And the whole neighborhood witnessed our coronation at the tree on the corner next to my mother's house. So just call me green. Use every opportunity, just call me green while it's still possible in the city. Call me green. I sometimes regretfully prefer it, in fact, because sometimes being called any other color is better than being called black.
Thank you. I really liked it. Thank you. Call me green. I'm just imagining how this just simple piece can change a lot of narratives that we're struggling with in our societies. I would like to pose the final question and to give you the floor if you want to add any comments to this conversation. But I will start with the question of what is your hope for the future of the streets? Like some years fast forward, what would be your ideal street that you would say, yes, we made some changes and we're successful?
I think by saying good morning, afternoon, good evening to one another. Like by
on the street, you mean?
Yeah. Like we just walk past one another like as if we don't exist. We bike past one another at the green light. We don't say nothing. Everybody's just focused. I need to go to my destination without acknowledging like you're sitting next to somebody, or like maybe I would have met married it, and we will both be biking. But I didn't look up at LinkedIn or anything, and I come in like, but I just saw you at the stop. But why didn't you say hello? Like maybe let's start by changing, because then we can feel like safer or welcome, or yeah.
Yeah, but that would be a lot to say hello to everyone.
No, not everybody, not everybody, but
Joking, yes.
just I don't know, like yeah, whenever you feel like saying hello, let me say that. Yeah.
Try it tomorrow to say it to everyone.
Yeah, I will start. People will think I'm crazy. Thank you, Kenneth. Before I continue to ask you other three to reflect on this question, I just received a question from online audiences. It's a little bit vague, but let's just see if we can find an answer for. The question is, how do you see the design of the street for more social functions and political participation? I guess the question is more focused on the design of the street.
I think it's a question that fits your hope for the future.
Okay.
Because I think we see a sort of movement towards also privatization and commercialization of the streets, and also a lot of hostile architecture. So architecture that's made for people to move quickly through the streets, but not spend too much time meeting each other and chatting with each other. So, and that's of course again focused on those communities that are not fitting the image of the productive, well-behaving citizen. So people who are homeless, for example, and sleep on the street. So there's these benches that have now this like armrests in the middle, so you cannot lay on them, or spaces on the side of the streets with spikes, so you cannot sit on them. So that kind of hostile architecture, a lot of camera surveillance, of course, but also, for example, terraces taking up more space where you can only stay when you pay for a consumption. So all these kinds of regulatory movements are limiting the space that we have to just meet each other and have these encounters and spend time on the street. So I think it would be nice to have a sort of counter movement to hopefully have more opportunities for design that is less hostile, more inviting, to spend time also outside of commercial relations, to just meet each other. So maybe that, I would say my hope, I agree with you, it would be nice to have more meeting space, basic interactions on the streets, but also to have the streets more like a blank canvas in a way. So not over-regulated, not overly designed, to have it more like an open space that people can feel invited to just create it themselves in a way, to sort of design the streets according to their liking, maybe temporary, so you can have all, different projects with different people, painting mats, taking them away again, putting them somewhere else. So the openness to have this creativity to redesign the streets together. Yeah, that would be nice, actually.
Yeah. The new design is less design, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thanks. Yeah. Indeed.
Do you want to say something like about your hope as the blank canvas?
Yeah, I have this not very realistic hope that one day the streets will be like more inclusive for everyone, and that everybody feels safe and welcome, and that but it's a long way, so we have to figure out probably some radical changes, and not just we have to figure out how we can make things
smaller scale changes to see how things can
well
work.
I think we need like really big scale changes with regulations, like deregulating stuff, maybe less policing, different, like we have to figure out a new system. It doesn't work this way, so
yeah, thanks for your honesty.
Sorry for my
Meredith, do you want to also go for
but I also hope that street culture never dies, and that I just hope that there's more street for everyone to use, and that I do like the fact that we have a focus point that street is something beautiful, and that we're finally embracing it, and that we're finally embracing street as something that that is the birthplace of a lot of creativity and beautiful stuff. And it's not just for meeting, it's the essence of, when we live together, we need to live together with each other and say hi to each other and figure all this stuff out together.
Yeah.
And if the regulations inhibit us from doing that, it will not work.
And maybe also diversity, right? Street culture. There is not one street culture. Street culture is diverse in its essence. So this over-regulation is homogenizing also what can take place on the streets and who can use the street. So to have all this huge variety of different stories, different street cultures, that would be nice too.
But it would also mean that people will just have to accept that cities are just by default chaotic and irregular and weird and then
unexpected also in a way, and risky therefore also. Yeah.
True.
Or not just people accepting that, but also city governments accepting that.
They will have to do a lot of accepting.
Maybe that's
and vision,
the first,
right?
So.
I think that's the other thing, that what can be a vision from a municipality for accommodating this type of description of the use of streets that you guys are so beautifully articulating. How can a city provide for that, and also reflecting the next generations, right? You're speaking about youth, and these are such a vulnerable population who don't have the rights to vote, right? So how can they help design our cities and feel present at the table, right? How can they come out of their houses and feel safe and accepted to also voice their own opinions about? I would love to see, what would it be, like a Kinderstraatrad or something, like a
I think they
youth.
would do a better job.
Yes.
They would ask for much more space for bikes, for sure.
Well, and for football and for all different types of activities.
Easy to play without cars.
Yeah.
Lesser cars.
More swimming pools on streets. To get your A
Interesting.
diploma.
Yeah.
But I guess the question that you pose can open up a new conversation. But I guess our conversation ends here because we don't have that much of time left. Thank you so much to all of you being here tonight and at this table. And thank you for the people joining us here in the studio and also people who are watching us online. The program will be recorded, so you can watch it back through Podcast de Zwijger's website. And next week, we will be back with another DCFA special, as I have mentioned, like the one-time episode. It is called Colonial Archives on the Map. You're seeing the Dutch title because this program specifically is going to be fully in Dutch, although we do most of the, almost all the DCFA programs in English for the sake of inclusion. For the matter of the topic, for the sake of the topic, we are doing this one in Dutch. So be sure that if you are registering for this program, you know Dutch. And you can also become a friend of Podcast de Zwijgers by scanning this QR code because all of our programs are free of charge and you can just pay as you like. And thank you for watching. To watch back the previous DCFA programs and also to get more information, you can just go to dezwijger.nl/DCFA. And have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye.